Thank you. Thank you very much. Please be seated. Thank you. Thanks. Thank you. Please have a seat. Thank you. Thanks. Well, Dan, thank you for those kind words. And I want to thank everyone at the Chamber for this great event. In terms of the whole process, Sandy, Tammy, the whole team, Joe in terms of being chair, let's give them a round of applause for their great work. Now, before I get making comments, I'll share one story with you because it brings back memories coming up here on stage. And it goes back to 2009. It actually wasn't this conference, but it was the Republican conference that's held in the fall, that they were holding a debate, a candidate debate. And if you look, I don't have credentials on. I was able to get up here and get in here without credentials. So the way the story worked back then is I was part of the debate. This was one of my first public appearances as someone running for governor. And so I came, and I didn't wear my credentials because I was coming up to be part of the forum up here in terms of being one of the candidates. So I came, was coming to the door, and I was stopped. They weren't going to let me in because I didn't have my credentials. So I had to explain to them I was actually running for governor, and I was going to be up on stage. And after this discussion, they finally said, well, I guess you are, so it's okay for you to come in. So we have come a long way, so it's great to be with you today. But let me start with a question. I'm going to ask you to raise your hand. In the last 5 years, how many of you here ask yourself the question whether or not Michigan's best days were ahead of us or behind us? Think back to like 2008 and 2009. And at some point in your mind, how many of you here actually ask yourself that question? Were our best days ahead or behind us? A lot of the hands are up. And I think that says a lot about how bad things were. The good part, the part I hope we can get every hand to go up today, is that our best days are ahead of us, because they are. And that's something really special. And that's something we need to spread the word on and be loud and proud about. And why can I be so confident when I say that? Well, the facts prove it already. We're the comeback state in the United States. If you look at our low point from 2009, our unemployment rate's down almost 6 percentage points. We've added about 250,000 plus private sector jobs. Personal income's coming back. It had gone down. It's actually had been growing faster than the national average in the last couple of years. Population's growing again. A lot of good things, but we shouldn't take this for granted. We cannot get complacent nor content. It's just time to keep going. But it is to keep our eye on that ball that our best days are ahead of us. And how do we do that? Well, that's what I want to talk about today. And it's really based on one of the pillars of this conference. Because these are good pillars. And I mentioned that when I did the opening. So I'm picking one of the pillars today. And in many respects, I view it as the most important pillar. It's the pillar of culture. Because a lot of this is about our mindset. Our mindset and whether we're positive or negative. Our mindset and less about being team players or fighting with one another. About forward-looking versus backward-looking. Culture's the key. And changing a culture is a lot more difficult than changing a law or regulation or doing something in your business. So what I was going to do is walk through a number of the big issues today and really give some brief comments on them, but really point out how they really frame a much bigger cultural challenge that we need to embrace, that we need to grab, that we need to run with in a positive, constructive way. So 4 areas I decided to pick, and there are more of those, but hopefully it'll give you sort of a vision, not only of where we're at today, but the kind of questions we need to answer for the future. Because these recurring cultural themes are things we need to keep building on and do continuous improvement with and take on. So the first one is about government, in terms of looking at issues. And one of the things I've talked about government that's a cultural question is, what's the role of government? Why does government even exist? It's not about taking and spending money. That's not why government exists. Government exists to give you great customer service, and you're the customer. Think of that. And so you frame that in the question of, How can we recalibrate government to take that approach? I want to give you one illustration on an important, a critical issue. We just heard from Dan about the wonderful things in downtown and midtown Detroit, right? What a success story, and we need to tell that story more. But one thing, what about the neighborhoods of Detroit? Are we giving great customer service to the neighborhoods? And there's a lot of work we need to do there, but we're on the path by asking this question and focusing on customer service. And the illustration I'll give you is something that we've created called Pathways to Potential. It's really based on a program that started in Grand Rapids with this Kent School Services Network. And what's this all about? Well, how do we normally deal with people in neighborhoods that actually had needs, that needed to deal with human services at the state level? Well, we'd tell them every so often, you got to come meet with a caseworker. Well, what did that involve? Well, they'd have to find 1, 2, 3 buses. They'd have to figure out how to get there. They'd have to come in some drab government office. They'd have to wait in line. That's customer service. That's a disservice. So what have we done? You have the caseworker leave the government office and you put them in the local elementary school, the local public school, in their neighborhood, so they can just walk in and be served and get better service and have the caseworker see their whole environment so they can provide other services. That's customer service. That's the focus we need to bring. Big issue, new culture, better answer. Next illustration, about being financially accountable and responsible. One of the interesting things when we started talking about budget and how we had a budget surplus opportunity, what came out right away is 2 groups came out right away. One group came out and said, hey, we can just go spend more money, more programs. Another group came out and said, you got to give it all back. Don't take a dollar. Do a big tax cut. Both those answers are dumb. It's about being financially responsible. Government needs to act more like a family. In a family, if you have resources and stuff, what's the first thing you do? You look to say, do I have a mortgage? Do I have credit card debt? Do I have other things? Should I be making payments on those or making sure I'm making the right payments, right? Before you go out and spend a bunch of money? Or before you say, I don't need that money. You pay down your debt. And that's what we've been doing. So when you hear about a lot of the resources we've been putting in the budget, it's to pay down our long-term liabilities. And that gets to another cultural question about government thinks too short-term. They think about a 2-year election cycle. They think about a 1-year budget. That's not very bright. So John Nixon was here earlier. I've had John modeling out the state in terms of our liabilities through 2040. 2040. And we're making payments and we're putting in place payment plans that we need to stick to. But if we stick to them, I've already told people, if you want a really sweet job, run for governor in 2038. That's the time to be there. Dan was talking about tough calls, tough decisions. Hey, it's going to be a whole lot cooler in terms of fewer of those in 2038, I hope. This is about changing that mind frame and moving in that course and direction. So think about that. Customer service is the role of government. Being financially accountable and responsible. And the next one I'm going to add about thinking about the right time frame is the whole transportation funding issue. If you're talking about transportation funding, do you look at it as a 1 or 2 year issue? You're talking about a 20-year asset, a 40-year asset. It's a silly analysis to say, what's the cost this next year? The real answer is, we need to make that investment because it's going to save us more than twice as much money if we don't make that investment. It's the old, let's do an oil change instead of an engine rebuild over the life of the car. Well, we're talking about 10 billion, 12 billion versus 25 in the life of a road. And in addition to that, we're talking about saving nearly 100 lives a year. And you can't put a price on that. That's a culture change. And that's the culture change we're working in government. Next topic, education. Same kind of questions. We need to redefine the dialogue. How much of the discussion on education in the last decade is about spending money? The point of an education system is not to spend money. It's to educate kids. And we need a student-centric model where the original question that always needs to be put on the table is, are we getting our kids to learn at least 1 year's worth of knowledge each and every year they're in our educational system? Anything less than that is not acceptable. And so we're making that transition to say, let's make it student-centric, not money-centric, actually adult-centric. The other piece that goes with that is the vision I love of P20, prenatal through lifelong learning. Because isn't the point of an education system, ask that same question, why does it exist? It's to do two things in my book. It's to help people be successful in a career or self-enrichment. I mean, we always want a system where you can just say, I want to be better, I want to be smarter, take whatever class you want, be better and smarter, self-enrichment. But the other part is about getting a career and be ready and focused for a career. I think we've lost sight of that versus saying it's about getting someone a diploma. It's about passing them on to the next part of the process. I think we have a bigger responsibility to say, let's put them in a seamless system where we can help make sure they understand their choices, they get to make that choice, but they can make an informed decision about what their career opportunities are and the ability to have access to that training that would make them successful in that area. One subset of that I want to emphasize, and I mentioned this before when I did the opening, is I think we have an imperative to understand that we need to continue to talk about going to college. But we need to reorient to also say we need that same imperative applied to career technical training, to skilled trades. Because there are fabulous opportunities. And the biggest thing holding us back there is we've done ourselves a disservice because we don't promote those things appropriately. Let's just solve it. That's a cultural question. So great opportunity in education. Next one, healthcare. We're working on Healthy Michigan. And that's been a big controversy. Lots of issues around Healthy Michigan. If you stop and look at it, though, it's a simple question that comes to say, can we effectively deliver services? Because it's about covering people that aren't covered. What happens when you don't cover someone? The current system that we have. You have an unmanaged, uncontrolled system where when someone needs health care, they end up in the emergency room. They're really unhealthy, highly expensive, doesn't solve the problem, they're going to be back in the ER again. Terrible answer for them and for society. To say, now we have an opportunity to do it in a smart way. Again, this isn't about spending money, because I wouldn't take federal money just simply to take federal money. It's like, what do you do with those resources? And the issue is can we get them in a system where there's some element of personal responsibility, a wellness component. A component then to say there's a medical home model, a primary care relationship being made. A situation where there's a responsibility to get a physical. There's a responsibility to get immunizations. And now we've created an environment where the ER isn't the answer. It still needs to be there, but it shouldn't be the answer. And I think all of us, we don't need sophisticated analysis. We know the math on that. That would be a better outcome for each of those individuals, right? It would also reduce cost to society. And that's a cost whether it shows up in your insurance premium, in your tax bill, wherever, but the net cost to society could be managed in a downward fashion. That would be more positive. Well, that's where we need to get over. This is not a discussion about money. This is not a discussion over partisanship. This is a discussion over, can we move from unmanaged to managed and do it in an effective fashion. The thing I'll tell you about healthcare, though, is all this stuff on the Affordable Care Act, wherever you are on it, isn't going to solve our healthcare crisis. It's only dealing with one aspect. And so as you look at it, there's a lot more discussion to come that need to be resolved. And how can I say that? I'm not a healthcare expert. I've done investments, I've created companies in the field, and what I'll tell you is we're still not addressing the question of wellness to the degree we need to. Basic personal responsibility. Until that's really put at the forefront of a lot of analysis and done in the most effective fashion, we're fooling ourselves. The other part is we need to ask the question about how do we get more cost efficient? Again, more the medical home model. And there are elements of that being done, but there's a lot more work to say, how do we put more resources in the front lines on the healthcare piece, on the wellness piece, on the chronic piece, and understanding that's critically important to help with all the other cost structures. Those are discussions that are going to need to take place in the next 5, 10 years. So we need to address those. Now, the fourth area I want to come up is the general area, just generally, because I think these are important things to talk about. One of the things that a couple events that have happened, even here at the conference, really shows it's about teamwork. And it's about us breaking down the silos that too often we created to say, hey, you're in the private sector, you're in the nonprofit sector, you're in the education sector, you're in some different sector, so you're in a different world. We need to break down those barriers. One of the illustrations I'll use, this is about partnerships being created. Partnerships within sectors and between sectors. One within sector I'm really excited about. We did a huge announcement yesterday. I don't know how many of you were able to catch it. It was about Pure Michigan Business Connect. Because people talked about how do you do economic development, how's it being done in the rest of the country. They give out tax credits to everybody. It's a crazy system. It's the heroin drip of government. What we did in Michigan is say, can we ask Michiganders to do better business with other people in Michigan? Don't give them a special deal. Treat them the way they should. They have to be an outstanding supplier. But would you talk to other people in Michigan? We launched that program at this conference 2 years ago. We had some pretty good goals. Well, yesterday we did an announcement with our 2 original parties that joined it, Consumers and DTE, and they deserve a big shout out. Thank you. They were both quadrupling their commitment to the program because it's gone so well. Not doubling, quadrupling. And we've got a whole lot more people signed up. That's awesome. And what is it? It's a good neighbor policy. The state's the facilitator. We're not putting big dollars in this. We're facilitating because people are doing good business with good people. That's cool. Now, take it between sectors. This is where we need to work together. Earlier this year, I've been emphasizing talent. Talent in the 3 C's. Because I view this as one of our greatest strategic challenges, but greatest strategic opportunities for the state of Michigan. Who leads on talent is going to help lead the nation in terms of employment, economic success, and everything else. Because we have a broken system for talent in our country. And that's because it requires sectors to work together. And what do I mean by that? Of the 3 C's, the first C is collaboration. We need the private sector more involved to really aggregate the demand that they need for future talent today and tomorrow, and what skill sets are required. And so we had an Economic Development Summit back in March to focus in on that. The second C is about creating talent. Again, back to the education sector. And so we're focused on creating talent there, and so in April we held the summit on education. But what we didn't do is treat them as islands. We had people going between the two, and now we're working on integrating the outcomes in an effective fashion, which is the third C, which is connection. So the jurisdictions in this country, in the world, that finally get their act together about how to connect talent through collaboration, creation, and connection are going to have a fundamental strategic advantage on economic success. And one of the key priorities I view is we need to lead the country and the world on that topic. That's a cultural question, because it's about asking groups to come together to do that. One subset of that we've been advocating is more regionalism. Michigan is a series of regional economies, and we made great progress about getting sections of the state together to say, hey, be your own team, and then we'll integrate as a statewide team. Because how many times can you think back to where you'd have one community fighting with another community? Rather than partnering, rather than realizing there's a bond that people need to come together on and succeed together on. That's critically important. So that's one of them. The second one is something that we need to be more proactive about who we are. We need to be loud and proud. And I think I've mentioned that before. But we need to bring that to life. So one of the things I wanted to do is I want to ask another question. Actually, I'm going to ask you not to put up your hand, but to do something more radical. Actually stand up. And the question I have for you is, if you're a member of an organization, whether you're profit, nonprofit, any kind of organization, has created or will create, in your belief, at least one job this year? If you're a member of an organization that you think you're going to have one incrementally new job being created, stand up, please. Now, for all of us here, this is our economic future. It's not the government. We're the enabler for an environment. These are the people creating the jobs. Let's give them a round of applause. Now, don't sit down yet. No, come on, back up. I'm not done. I'm having too much fun now. I have another question. Look around the room and see how many people are standing up. I believe it's the majority of the room. Now, let me ask you this question. Remain standing if you've gone out and publicly made statements about how you've added that job or will add that job. If you've not said anything, please sit down. I think we lost more than half. Is that a reasonable statement? We lost more than half the people. Everybody can sit down now. I know you're a little nervous about where I'm going with this. Think about that. We probably had 80–90% of the room standing that are adding a job. How powerful is that? And then we had more than half the room sit down. How dumb is that? No, I'm not trying to be mean, but think about that. If we want to be successful, we need to be loud and proud. It's not boastful, it's not arrogant. But how do we expect to get the world to recognize we're the comeback place, that we're on this path to success, if we don't elect to tell anyone? So I ask each one of you that sat down to speak up, to make a statement, to tell people, you're the job creators. So please do that. And that's a cultural issue, again, back to culture. Now, the other thing is this isn't just about jobs. We want to get people more involved, particularly young people. So I've done a number of sessions with young people recently. And I've had great dialogue and discussion, but I got cranky after a little while. I get grumpy, you know that. If not enough stuff's going on, I get, come on now, we got to do something. So I had wonderful discussions with these young people, but it's like, this is too much talk. We've got to do something. So actually, if we can bring up Do Something Michigan, I think we're going to see how good my AV system is in terms of popping this up. There we go. Do Something Michigan is we launched this yesterday to say, here's a system for you to be an ambassador for Michigan, a Michigan ambassador, that says you can text the word action to 25827. This is a commercial, action to 25827. You can go to DoSomethingMichigan.com, but we've partnered with DHive and with the Michigan Community Service Commission to have a follow-up program to contact you or anyone that signs up to say you can volunteer, you can mentor, you can engage, you can speak up, but it's doing that same thing I just asked you on the business front on a personal note. To get active. That's really cool. We launched this yesterday afternoon. We've had 5,000 people in the system already. Third cultural thing I want to cover in general. This is kind of a fun one in a lot of ways. Because when I took office, one of the classics was I would have people come up to me and say, be bold. You have to be bold. But then they would come back, typically within 2 minutes. Sometimes it'd be right after, sometimes there'd be like a time delay. It's like we'd talk about something else and they'd come back and revisit it. And the next words out of their mouth is, don't set the bar too high. I'm serious, this happened multiple times. Think about that. That's a cultural problem that we have in Michigan. It's like, if you're going to be bold, you got to set a high bar. And so, hopefully I've been a good role model setting a high bar. Because you got to go for it. And one of the things people ask me, and I got this question a lot from the media this week. It's like, do you feel year 3, you're just not doing stuff anymore after years 1 and 2? And the answer is no. I said, if everything I sought to do would happen, If I was successful at every initiative, every idea I put out there, I wouldn't be doing my job. My job's to help be bold, to reinvent Michigan. That's what you hired me to do. And it's interesting, we have this cultural problem in our state that in many respects, we almost fear failure or fear not having something happen because we view it as a personal failure. That's one of our greatest threats, folks. When something doesn't happen, two things happen to me. I do get a little grumpy. I'm not always positive. I get grumpy occasionally. But as a practical matter about it, what I do is I view it as a learning experience. To say, it's not a failure. I've learned something new. Now, how do you come back and use that relentless part to go after it again and pursue it? And that's something we really need to encourage throughout all of Michigan. Because again, we want to be innovation, entrepreneurial. And if you have an environment where you have this fear of failure, if you set a situation where you can say everything's got to be accomplished and there's no situation, you're not setting the bar high enough. And we need to work on that. There's a person I use as a role model I always come back to when people ask me about that. Because I sort of entered politics in middle age. I know that's a tough thing to say, but I'm not a political person. You go into a new field in that stage and hey, you're going to go for it. May not work. Again, I couldn't even get in the room a few years ago. But a person I always look back to, I admired, particularly for this attribute, was Henry Ford. Henry Ford really didn't find major success until he was in his middle ages. And the interesting part is, it was the third Ford Motor Company that worked. How would it have gone if Henry Ford would have been in a culture like we had for the last 20, 30 years, where if he failed after the first one, everyone would say, well, this guy's a has-been, he's all washed up, he's done, I'm not going to invest in him. Third time, pretty good success, still going strong. We should be proud of that story. So that's an opportunity to understand, set a high bar, create a culture of environment where you support people that may not have a success, but help them learn from that, help them win, help them come back and succeed again. And that's part of our culture. The last one I'm going to close with, this will be no surprise to anyone here. There's a phrase I use quite often. What do you think that is? Very good. It's working now, folks. This is good. Relentless positive action. It ties to this last point I just made. I've been a relentless positive action person my life. The funny part is this shows how you grow up and learn. I never called it that. I did it my life, but I never had a name for it. And the reason is, RPA is not original to me. I see a lot of RPA people out there. And what RPA really is what I just described. It's an innovator. It's an entrepreneur. It's someone that doesn't fear failure. It's someone that's going to continue pursuing something even if it doesn't work, if they believe it's right. It's a person that's got a positive attitude, that isn't going to get caught in blame. Really doesn't care about credit, because if you talk to an entrepreneur and an innovator, and you really talk to them, there are a few rare exceptions. But even the very most successful will say, I didn't do this by myself. I did it as part of a team. And the interesting part is, most of the team never gets the credit to the same degree as that point person. But they know in their heart, there was a team that did it with them. And so, I've been an RPA person for a long time, looking at innovation, entrepreneurship, and there's a whole room full of many of you that are in that same group. Now we have a name for it in the public sector. And the way to look at it, look at the power. Because again, look at what we've accomplished. We have a lot more to do, but we've gotten a lot done. But compare it to Washington and the mess that is there. No budget, huge deficit, needed tax reform. We've heard it from people. We did all three of those things here in Michigan in the last 2 or 3 years. And think about when you listen to the press in Washington, what Washington would be like if no one blamed anyone, if no one took credit, If people simply said, here's a common sense issue, here's a common sense solution, we're going to do it. How much would our world be different? And eventually, I think RPA will come to Washington in terms of someone bringing it. But we can be that role model here in Michigan. We're doing it here. So I hope this has been helpful to you, because a lot of what we're going to continue to talk about, there'll be this issue, that issue, roads, healthy Michigan, this or that. But as you look at each one of these issues, don't get caught up in the issue too much, too quickly. Step back from that issue and look at that issue from a cultural perspective. To say, if our best days are ahead of us, and they are, how do we need to culturally approach this? To say, we're solving the problem without blame, without credit. We're solving this because it has positive outcomes for the future. Apply those principles. And then look around to say, who do we need to partner with? Is there someone in a different sector? Is there someone in a different organization? And say, we're all one team. And bring it all together. That's what gets me so excited. Because this isn't about me, this is about we. This is our opportunity after a 100-year cycle of incredible success that led the globe, of a second half of us taking advantage of something that was too good and almost writing it in the ground, to step back and say, we're wise enough to learn from all the wonderful things and all the challenges we face before us. We have a window here of a number of years, a handful of years, to set the tone and direction for the next 50 or 100 years of Michigan. That's a special opportunity. And each one of us, I hope, I believe, we're going to be able to say with pride in 20 years that we were there at that inflection point. Not taking credit, but knowing in your heart you were there to say, this was that upward cycle in Michigan. That when you look at your kids, your grandkids, and their grandkids, you know they're going to have a better Michigan. They are going to have that brighter future because of the work we're doing here today. Thank you so much.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome WWJ News Radio 950 City Beat reporter, Vicki Thomas.
Thank you. Thank you.